And I'm sorry if this is a very kind of like a vague question, but are you familiar with the philosopher? Well, he calls himself doing foundations of physics, Tim Maudlin.
No, I haven't heard of them.
Yeah, so basically he works in a philosophy department. Although what his primary works like he's got a background in physics. I think he's got a PhD in physics, and his work is on deriving ontologies of the physical universe based on physics, on
Mhm.
what we know about modern physics. So he calls it the foundations of physics. And then when I was reading your stuff, it got me thinking, uh, uh, is there such a thing as the, let's say, the philosophical foundations of cognitive science and AGI, let's say? Is that something that you'd say researchers are actively working on? Or is that just what we would colloquially call philosophy of mind?
So I think that with uh, cognitive science, a lot of it is founded in things like logic and probability theory. And like there's, for example, the Bayesian brain hypothesis, which is a hypothesis that the mind approximates Bayesian inference. And there are at least some empirical tests that provide some limited support for this. And there's more generally things like the problem of induction, where there's this open question of how does the mind induce the future from the past.
Yeah.
Even if there's no logical justification for why the sun will rise tomorrow if it's always risen in the past, human minds will do this, and there's some mechanistic explanation for this. Um, so I think that uh, some of the foundations include these like basic um, things that are considered like parts of good reasoning, such as um, logic and probability theory. Then there's you mentioned the mind-body problem, and that definitely intersects with neuroscience a lot because there's this methodological assumption that these states of the mind are somehow encoded in the brain. And this is like broadly pretty likely based on current scientific understanding. That like, for example, there aren't if you notice some difference in your mind, you have like n bits in your mental state, then there have to be at least n bits in your brain state for that to be represented somehow. I'd say that neuroscience certainly has a philosophy of mind as a foundation in terms of assumptions about how the mind's processing relates to the brain functions.
Honestly,
Um,
sorry, keep going. You were gonna
you also mentioned the foundations of cognitive science and AI.
AI. Yes, yes.
I would say that AI is more founded in something I said before, which is just foundations of correct reasoning, which includes things like logic, probability theory, and induction.
Understood. Yeah, because the one thing I was thinking about was so, for instance, if I kind of expand on that question, like Tim Maudlin, when he says foundations of physics, I feel like that's in a way quite straightforward. It's trying to find kind of the ontological reality of our physical world, the physical universe. But then when it comes to something like AI, or maybe perhaps more specifically CogSci, it gets a bit hazy because yes, we have cognition and the human subject, but then the question is like, what is human subjectivity? And that's a question I guess asked since the beginning of philosophy in some sense, right? And then especially
Mhm.
since like, the Kant and the German idealist, and then that got me thinking: are there really? Do we really have people working in cognitive science that are trying to kind of let's say speculate and derive meaningful uh, foundations of what a human subject is based on cognitive science and AI. So would you say from what you just said that the answer is yes, or is it still more like just focus on the science itself, forget about ontology or philosophy?
Oh, I would say yes. And I think that it might be hard to notice this if you're just looking at papers published, because partially the papers are assuming some amount of background of people in the field already share certain assumptions. And partially also, um, when people are presenting their findings, they're not trying to look too speculative. Like I think a big thing in science is that you an underspecified part of the scientific method is how do you even come up with these hypotheses in the first place? Like the method says, once you have a hypothesis, you should go out and test it. But how do you come up with the hypothesis? It can be very intuitive. It can come to you in a dream, even. So I think when scientists are presenting their findings, they might have gotten their hypothesis in a certain manner, which might be intuitive or based on kind of philosophical thought, but they're trying to show their finding in a non-speculative manner. Um, but I think certainly I've talked with cognitive scientists and they do tend to speculate about the human subject. So I mentioned the Bayesian brain hypothesis, and according to that hypothesis, perhaps the primary thing that humans are doing is constructing a model of the world based on sense data that is meant to do things such as predict future sense data. And then you can even go from that to think about values and like what are values. And there's things like planning algorithms, which might tell you like if I have a certain value that will tend to cause me to take certain actions that will achieve that end. And there's various algorithms that approximate that. And it's very much like that. Like if you're having these sorts of thoughts about what it is like to model the world and to want things and plan towards them, that can certainly influence your own understanding of yourself or other humans as well.
Yeah, what was the algorithm, Jessica? You said penny algorithm? Never heard of it.
Planning, like
Planning.
yeah. So if you, I guess things like reinforcement learning use some form of this.
Sure.
Where like an AlphaGo, it has like an evaluation of board states and some kind of Monte Carlo tree search to search among the game tree. And there's other algorithms like there's like in simpler logical problems you can do like back chaining to start from a goal state and ask like what does the state before the goal state look like, and then like what does the state before that look like, and try to get back to your current state.